Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has for weeks now denied he's delaying a ceasefire deal in Gaza by toughening Israel's position in the negotiations. Netanyahu continues to blame the stalled negotiations on Hamas, while senior members of Israel's security establishment are accusing him of personally slowing the process, including his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Israel in late July gave American, Egyptian, and Qatari mediators a list of new clarifications and qualifications that made the principles of a ceasefire it had made in May, of a ceasefire plan in May, less flexible. Hamas has also been unwilling to compromise on many key issues, and the terror organization has also requested its own extensive revisions throughout the negotiations. Despite Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar's supposed interest in ending the war, Hamas on Sunday evening said it did not plan to send negotiators even to Thursday's talks. Israel's Channel 13 News, citing unnamed security sources, highlighted also deep distrust between Netanyahu and the negotiating team representing Israel in the negotiations, claiming they hadn't been given a meaningful mandate by Netanyahu to bring to the upcoming talks. Despite that, Israeli security sources, according to their Channel 12 News, were still cautiously optimistic a deal was possible and could be completed at this Thursday's talks, being implemented within days after an agreement. The Israeli government said it would send a delegation to Thursday's talks, but again, Hamas insisted instead on a workable plan to implement the framework it had already accepted rather than more talks. Netanyahu's office denied he added any new conditions, saying he instead is trying to clarify ambiguities in Israel's May proposal, making it easier to actually implement. The statement said, the July 27 letter does not introduce new terms. To the contrary, it includes essential clarifications to help implement the May 27 proposal. Hamas is the one that demanded 29 changes to the May 27 proposal, something the prime minister refused to do. So in a letter to mediators on July 27, the Israeli negotiation team apparently added 5 new clarifications to the outline of the May proposal, although the New York Times only revealed 2 of them. One of the 2, the most contentious additions, one of the 2 most contentious, was the inclusion of a map indicating Israel would remain in control of the border between Gaza and Egypt, an area known as the Philadelphia Corridor. By contrast, Israel's proposal in May had suggested troops would leave the border zone. It pledged the, quote, withdrawal of Israeli forces eastwards away from densely populated areas along the border in all areas of the Gaza Strip, close quote. A second key point adds new complexity to the way in which displaced Palestinians would return to their homes in the north during a ceasefire. For the record, for months, Israel has said it would only agree to a ceasefire if it could screen returning Palestinians for weapons as they return to their homes. Then in its May proposal, Israel appeared to soften that demand. While its position paper still stated the returnees should not be carrying arms while returning, it removed the explicit requirement that Israel forces screen them directly for weapons, making the policy seem to be more symbolic rather than directly enforceable, causing Hamas at the time to agree to it. Israel's July letter revived the question of enforcement, stating that the screening of people returning to the north would need to be implemented in an agreed upon manner. Mr. Netanyahu's office said there was no contradiction between the 2 positions, saying the second one made the first one easier to carry out. The letter not only does not contradict the May 27 proposal, it facilitates it, the statement said. In recent weeks, Mr. Netanyahu has suggested it is reasonable for Israel to seek to prevent Hamas from rebuilding its military strongholds in northern Gaza. Hamas is, quote, unprepared to allow any mechanism to check for and prevent the passage of munitions and terrorists to the northern Gaza Strip, he said on August 4th. It is doing all of this because it wants to recover and rebuild and return again and again to the massacre of October 7th. Senior Israeli officials familiar with the latest negotiations, however, as well as leaders in Israel's security forces, agree in principle that Netanyahu, to his stance that it would be better to maintain checkpoints to screen people for weapons, but they also believe that it is not worth holding up a deal to get the hostages back in order to implement this one point, and said that he should hopefully reverse on this issue before Thursday's negotiation so that a deal to release the hostages and maintain and achieve a ceasefire could possibly happen. A Hamas official told Reuters that a CNN report saying the group planned to attend Thursday was wrong, saying our statement the other day was clear. What is needed is the implementation, not more negotiation, said the official, who declined to be named owing to the sensitivity of the issue.
Okay, so I think getting to an agreement is much more important than any provision in the agreement. And it's easy for us from the outside to say, hey, that provision is important, that provision is not important. Some things are pretty obvious. I'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, who's preventing the agreement? Well, in May, it looked like they had something that both sides had kind of agreed to. Now we know definitively that both sides have added provisions, but Israel was denying that they had added provisions, and now we know for sure that they did. 5 significant provisions, and that is part of what's holding it up. Guys, if we didn't have the election situation hanging over Netanyahu's head, I would say, look, I don't know, maybe they don't want a ceasefire for this reason or that reason, or maybe they do want a ceasefire, but they changed their mind, or the security situation changed, etc. But in this case, it's pretty obvious what's happening. And if they get a ceasefire, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich say that they'll leave the government. If they do, then elections will have to be called. And Netanyahu's trailing badly in the polls, he'll lose. So he has an enormous incentive. In fact, all the incentive in the world as a politician who is both now unpopular, will lose the election, and might even get arrested on not this, but on corruption charges. So he's got and he's not only does he have a massive personal incentive, not related to the state of Israel and what's best for Israel, let alone the Palestinians, of course, but for what's best for Netanyahu here. And so if you think that's not affecting a politician like Netanyahu, first of all, it would affect almost any politician, let alone a guy like Netanyahu, who has shown over and over again that the main thing that he cares about is his own personal career. And he's not alone there. There's tons of politicians who've shown that, but he certainly has done it in spades. So is Netanyahu delaying this? Well, again, not really in dispute anymore, because now the Israeli defense minister and the top military spokesperson also saying the same thing. Not necessarily saying, okay, it's Netanyahu's fault, but saying we're adding provisions to a ceasefire. We can't, let's just get it done, right? But mainly, the most important thing they're saying is this idea of absolute victory over Hamas is a mirage. It's not possible. It's absurd. And they didn't quite go as far as I did when I said the other day, it's purposely not achievable, right? But they've gone all the way up to that statement, saying, no, this is not a thing. This is not a real thing. It's not doable. We don't know when we win, right? And this is like I said, the top military spokesperson in Israel and the defense minister. So as far as the specific details are concerned, like when you say checkpoint for guns so they don't bring weapons into northern part of Gaza, that sounds logical, right? The only problem there is that it's a checkpoint. And so whenever you have an Israeli checkpoint inside Gaza, that creates a bigger issue. Now, look, however they resolve that is up to them. So if Hamas says we're okay with the checkpoint, great, then we got a deal, right? And so I don't have a point of view on that. I have a point of view on, no, you can't keep the Philadelphia corridor. That's the southern border of Gaza. That's just more land that Israel would be keeping from Gaza. I can't imagine that any Palestinian would agree to that, let alone Hamas. So that appears to be a deal breaker you put in if you don't want a deal. To me, that's what it looks like. What do you think, Ben?
I agree with you largely. I agree that it makes sense to want to screen people returning to the north for weapons, because you don't know who's members of Hamas and don't want them to be able to regroup. I disagree that the Philadelphia corridor on the border of Egypt and Gaza is a deal breaker. I mean, we'll see on Thursday whether it indeed is or not, but if it's reasonable to want to stop the flow of weapons back to the north, it seems reasonable to also want to stop the flow of weapons from Egypt, which has been a major area that weapons have flown through. I don't think it's a land grab, because Israel's not gonna be building settlements in the very south of Gaza, right next to Egypt, not even near its own land. If anything, settlements expand from their own territory downward. It would be a military checkpoint to make sure there isn't the ability for major munitions to be coming so that Hamas can regroup. So I disagree on that. I do agree on your more general point that you can't really trust Netanyahu. You can't trust him to be an actor. You certainly can't trust Hamas, and they're changing their mind all the time on these negotiations. And now Netanyahu seems to be doing that as well. I don't know that these 5 are necessarily changing terms. Even Hamas is asking for clarifications based on the May proposal. They're not even sending a delegation to negotiate. So it isn't a new proposal, it's clarifying. It seems a little bit ambiguous about the one about the Philadelphia corridor, because that maybe is because they implied that they wouldn't have troops near border areas, but it said near heavily populated border areas. You don't know if that includes a 50-foot wide strip right there just to be able to like check munitions. But the larger issue, you're completely right. Netanyahu is at risk of losing his coalition, and if he gets a ceasefire deal achieved, he's gonna be kicked out of power almost certainly. And so he's in a personal conundrum that I don't think you can trust. I mean, his own people say they don't trust his own negotiating team. Doesn't feel like they've been empowered by him to go in good faith into these negotiations, which is a giant problem. And hopefully they can come up with such a good deal on Thursday that still brings it that way. I don't think most people in Israel, it's clear he's very unpopular in the polls, are big fans of his. I'm no supporter of his, no big fan of his. My mom, who is Israeli, grew up in Israel and served in the IDF, texted me earlier, Bibi is a monster, plain and simple. I don't think you can argue that the guy is a bad faith actor. And so we're stuck with imperfect situations. We're stuck with bad people that are trying to make a deal that are gonna hopefully improve the lives and stop this chaos and horrible tragedy on both sides of this very difficult issue. So let's just hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, last couple of things here. Look, I wouldn't give up an inch of Gaza, but if Hamas says yes to any deal, all right, they said yes, I'm thrilled. Even if, and I don't think that they're going to do a deal, like my guess is my deal with Israel would be a lot more reasonable than Hamas's deal would. So if they say yes, I guess it was good enough. And I hope to God that they do. But
why wouldn't you give up an inch? Why wouldn't you, not for, like I said, not for building, I would agree with you, you shouldn't give up an inch for building a settlement or letting people move into Gaza. But why would you not want to for sure stem the flow of weapons?
No, I mean, because giving up land in the West Bank turned out to be an absolute disaster. They took more and more and more, nonstop, more. And second of all, we want to end the occupation. So any further Israeli territory inside the occupied territories, I think is a terrible idea, because it puts them, and I think it's a bad idea for Israel too, because it gets you ingrained into those, dug into those territories. You don't want to be dug into those. I think those territories are an albatross around Israel's neck, and so it's destroying their international reputation. They're hated for it 57 years. And so you got to get out of that business. If I'm a Palestinian, I wouldn't trust Israel with 1 inch of land. I mean, look at the track record. The track record is terrible.
But vice versa, same exact thing. If I were Israel, I wouldn't trust the Palestinian government to not build many more tunnels. They already uncovered hundreds of tunnels from Egypt into Gaza. So what do you do?
So I hear you, and it's not, and I'm not naive. Do you think that they didn't smuggle any weapons in from Egypt to Gaza? Of course they did, right? And so that's why the two sides don't trust each other. That's why we're all desperately trying to get to a ceasefire here so we can move on. And guys, and that leads to the final point, which is, it's not, hey, are we just going to have a ceasefire or are we not? It's going to continue at this level, and this level is already terrible. I mean, 100 killed in the last bombing. 5 schools being used as shelter for refugees, bombed in the last week,
and used as bases for Hamas at the exact same time.
Yeah. Okay. So all this continues to go on, and that's already terrible enough. But what we're really worried about is that if they don't have a deal, that Iran is going to do a much larger bombing in retaliation for the Ismail Haniyeh killing, and Hezbollah is going to join them for retaliation of their top military commander being assassinated, and that the war is going to get way worse, not just stay at its already terrible level. So it's imperative that we get that ceasefire deal this week, but are we going to? I don't know.
And also just one point that I think often is not connecting with the dots here in people's opinion of this. I just think it's important to realize, look, Israel killed Hamas's leader in Iran, and Iran vows to retaliate, as does Hezbollah in Lebanon vows to retaliate for a Hamas leader being killed, just proving plain as day that this is not just a fight against Hamas. It is a fight against Iran and its terror proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza. And so Israel needs to find an end to this war to bring peace to innocent Palestinians, and it also needs to be able to protect itself from not just Hamas, who you might see as not as strong as Israel, but Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and the Houthis in Yemen and all of these forces that are on the same side and are against us in the West, are against Israel, and are trying to eradicate them from Earth. So they also have to find a solution that keeps them safe. And
that's easy. End occupation. Then the whole world's united against Iran instead of against Israel. And look, we got to go. But
can we agree on this last point? When the war ends, when there is a ceasefire and then an agreement to end the war permanently, do you agree that the world community then should hold to account whoever the next first aggressor is? So if peace is broken by Israel, the world should attack them for that and lambaste them for that and condemn them for it. And if Hamas is the first to attack, or if Hezbollah is the first to send rockets in, we're going to say, look, we have agreement and look who attacked first.
100%. Yeah, because the whole point of a peace deal is peace. So if after the peace deal, Hamas, Hezbollah, or anyone breaks it, no, there's got to be severe consequences. So we've got to get the peace, and then we've got to hold the peace.
Yep.
So Iran is, of course, financing some of Hamas and Hezbollah. But last point I'll make is, if anyone was assassinated in America, even if it's someone we hated, like when Arafat was here or anyone was here at the UN or something, we would do massive repercussions. So you can't just go and assassinate someone in a different country in their capital, no matter how much you dislike them. There's repercussions for that, and that's what we're trying to hold off, the terrible repercussions that might come. All right, let's hope they sign the deal. And I'll add one super last thing, which is that, but look at the diversity within Israel. So Netanyahu's a terrible guy. He's held up the ceasefire, and we're worried that we might not get one with him. But meanwhile, even the military and the defense secretary are saying, let's get the ceasefire deal. We're not going to be able to do this nonsense absolute victory over Hamas. Let's go, let's get the hostages back. And we should encourage those voices inside Israel and not Netanyahu.
And thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.